The moment you argue with a fool, you have already lost. Not because your logic is weak, not because your position is wrong, but because you have stepped into a game where truth is irrelevant. Most people believe arguments are about discovering who is right. They imagine that if they present enough evidence, enough reasoning, enough clarity, the other person will eventually understand. But this assumption collapses the moment you realize a simple psychological truth. People do not argue to find truth, they argue to defend identity. Arthur Schopenhauer understood this long before modern psychology put names to it. He saw that most individuals are not guided by reason, but by will. A blind, emotional force that seeks comfort, validation, and stability. When you challenge someone's belief, you are not simply offering them a new idea. You are threatening the structure that holds their sense of self together. And when identity feels threatened, the response is not curiosity, it is resistance. That resistance rarely looks logical. It shows itself through deflection, through raised voices, through subtle manipulations. People interrupt, they twist your words, they move the conversation away from the original point. They begin attacking your tone instead of your argument, your character instead of your reasoning. And if you are not careful, you follow them there. You start defending yourself instead of your idea. You react. And in that moment, you lose the very thing that gave you an advantage in the first place: clarity. This is why arguing with fools is your first defeat. Because the defeat does not happen at the end of the conversation. It happens at the beginning, the moment you decide to engage. The moment you allow someone else's confusion to dictate your behavior. The moment you exchange your calm for their chaos. The wise understand something most people learn too late. Not every conflict deserves your attention. Not every opinion deserves your response, and not every person deserves access to your mind. There is a discipline in silence that is often misunderstood. People confuse it with weakness, with avoidance, with fear. But silence, when chosen consciously, is none of those things. It is control. Silence is the ability to see provocation and not react. It is the strength to remain centered when others are trying to pull you into emotional turbulence. It is the awareness that your energy is finite and that spending it carelessly is a form of self-sabotage, because every argument costs something. It costs time, attention, emotional stability. And most of the time, it gives nothing back. There is another truth that is uncomfortable but necessary to accept. You cannot reason someone out of a position they did not reason themselves into. If a belief is built on insecurity, on habit, on imitation, or on emotional comfort, logic has no leverage against it. You can present facts, you can construct perfect arguments. You can dismantle their claims point by point, and still nothing changes. Not because your reasoning failed, but because reasoning was never the foundation of their belief to begin with. And yet, people continue trying. They argue again and again, believing that if they just explain it differently, if they just push a little harder, something will click. But what they are really doing is feeding the very dynamic that traps them. Because the more you argue, the more the other person feels the need to defend. The more they defend, the more they invest in being right. And the more they invest, the less likely they are to ever change. Meanwhile, something else is happening beneath the surface. Your emotional state begins to shift. You become irritated, then frustrated, then reactive. Your tone changes. Your patience fades. And slowly, almost invisibly, you descend to the level of the interaction. What started as a calm exchange of ideas becomes a contest of ego. And in that environment, intelligence has no advantage. This is why silence is not just an absence of words. It is a strategic decision. It is the choice to refuse participation in a dynamic that cannot produce anything of value. It is the recognition that your peace is more important than being right in the eyes of someone who cannot see. The silent wall is built on this understanding. It is not something you show. It is something you maintain internally, an invisible boundary that determines what you engage with and what you ignore. And once you begin to build it, your interactions change. You stop reacting automatically. You stop feeling the need to correct every misunderstanding. You stop explaining yourself to people who are not trying to understand you. At first, this feels unnatural. There is a strong impulse to respond, to defend, to clarify. The ego wants to be seen as right. It wants recognition, validation, acknowledgement. But as you begin to step back, you notice something. Most arguments do not actually matter. They do not change your life. They do not improve your situation. They do not deepen your understanding. They are simply noise. And when you remove yourself from that noise, you gain something that is far more valuable than winning any argument: perspective. You begin to see patterns in people. You notice how predictable most reactions are. How certain individuals always deflect, always escalate, always avoid responsibility. You start to understand not just what people say, but why they say it. This is where real power begins to emerge. Not in domination, not in verbal victory, but in clarity. Because when you understand the underlying motivations behind someone's behavior, you no longer feel the need to engage with the surface. You see the insecurity behind the arrogance, the fear behind the aggression, the confusion behind the certainty. And once you see that, arguing feels pointless. It is like trying to convince a storm to calm down by explaining the weather. It misses the nature of what you are dealing with. And so, instead of trying to change the storm, you step out of it. You protect your space. You maintain your position. There is also a deeper layer to this. When you refuse to argue, you are not just protecting your peace. You are also refusing to validate a dynamic that thrives on conflict. Many people rely on argument as a way to feel significant. It gives them attention, engagement, a sense of importance. When you participate, you feed that cycle. When you withdraw, you break it. This is why silence can feel so powerful. It removes the fuel from the interaction. Without your reaction, there is nothing to push against. Without your defense, there is nothing to attack. And without your participation, the entire structure collapses. Of course, This does not mean you never speak. It does not mean you avoid all confrontation or suppress your voice. It means you become selective. You choose your words carefully, your timing deliberately, your audience intentionally. You speak when it matters, and you remain silent when it does not. This level of control is rare. Most people operate on impulse. They react immediately, emotionally, without reflection. They feel something and express it instantly. But the disciplined mind creates a gap between stimulus and response. And in that gap lies freedom. Freedom from unnecessary conflict. Freedom from emotional manipulation. Freedom from being pulled into conversations that drain rather than elevate. And once you experience that freedom, you begin to value it more than any argument you could win. There is also something else that changes. People start to perceive you differently. Not because you are trying to project an image, but because your behavior no longer fits their expectations. You do not react the way they anticipate. You do not engage in the same patterns, and that creates uncertainty. Uncertainty shifts power. Because when others cannot predict your reactions, they cannot control the interaction. They cannot provoke you in the same way. They cannot pull you into the same cycles. And that makes you, in a quiet way, untouchable. This is the paradox. By saying less, you gain more influence. By engaging less, you understand more. By stepping back, you see further. And none of this requires force. It requires awareness. So the next time you feel the urge to argue, pause for a moment. Notice what is happening internally. Is it a genuine desire to exchange ideas, or is it a reaction to being challenged? Is the other person open to understanding, or are they defending something deeper? And most importantly, ask yourself what you stand to gain. If the answer is nothing of real value, then the decision becomes simple. You do not engage. You do not explain. You do not react. You let the moment pass. Because your role is not to correct everyone. Your role is to maintain your clarity. And clarity is something that must be protected. It is easily distorted by noise, by emotion, by unnecessary conflict. And once it is lost, it takes time to rebuild. The silent wall is not about isolation. It is about intention. It is about choosing where your mind goes and where it does not. It is about recognizing that your attention is one of your most valuable resources and treating it accordingly. And once you fully understand this, something shifts. You stop trying to win arguments. You stop trying to prove yourself. You stop trying to be understood by those who are not willing to understand. And instead, you focus on something far more powerful. You focus on staying grounded, clear, unshaken. Because in the end, true intelligence is not measured by how well you argue. It is measured by how well you choose not to. If this made you think, write your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more psychological insights like this, subscribe to Perpetual Echoes.